Ever since Trump became president, there's been this hyper focus from the administration on border security. Everything from an attempt at a Muslim ban to countless stories of families being broken up by ICE officials. But Canada, the country that I'm from, might even be worse in some instances on this issue. So, as the Globe and Mail reports, Rafael Marques de Morais, an Angolan activist and journalist who has exposed corruption and human rights abuses in the oil-rich country for decades, was told in April that his request to visit his son in Canada has been rejected. Mr. Marques has received many international awards for his work in Angola, including a Democracy Award last year from the U.S. National Endowment for Democracy. In 2015, he was the co-winner of the $100,000 Allard Prize for International Integrity from the University of British Columbia for his exceptional courage and leadership in combating corruption. Now, Marques had only planned a 3-week stay in Canada to visit his 16-year-old son, who's currently attending school in Toronto. Now, why would an award-winning journalist who has a son that's going to school in Canada, why would he be rejected at the Canadian border? Well, a spokeswoman for the Federal Immigration Department said the Canadian officer decided that Mr. Marques was at risk of staying illegally in Canada because he has weak ties to Angola and strong ties to Canada as a result of his son and wife being there. In addition, Mr. Marques has outstanding criminal charges in Angola, she said. Now, I'll get to the outstanding criminal charges in a second, but essentially the Canadian government's excuse here is that he has some family in Canada. So, looking at this another way, if you are somebody who's coming into Canada and you have family there, you have less of a chance of acquiring a visitor visa. You're considered more of a risk if you have family in Canada and you're visiting Canada than you would if you didn't have family in Canada. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And Marques has routinely traveled abroad for conferences and speeches, including 3 previous visits to Canada, but always returns to Angola. He even remained in Angola during the country's civil war. So, Marques has a history of visiting Canada and then returning back to Angola. And he's traveled all over the world for his work and returns back to Angola. So on this premise, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense why you would reject this journalist from coming into the country. Oh, but he has outstanding criminal charges. Okay, let's see what those are. Those charges are widely considered to be politically motivated and a direct consequence of his hard-hitting journalism, which has exposed corruption at the highest levels of the Angolan government. More specifically, Marques is being prosecuted in Angola on charges of causing, quote, insult and outrage to the sovereign body. The charges stem from a story he published on his online media outlet, Maca Angola, which raises suspicions of corruption against Angola's former Attorney General, João Maria de Souza. So, the charges that he has in Angola are clearly bullshit. There is no legitimate reason to have not let this journalist into Canada. Now, speaking with South Africa's Mail and Guardian, Marques replied by saying, "It's demeaning when Western countries, or in this particular case, the Canadians, think that everyone wants to emigrate there. We've been at the forefront of fighting for changes in my country because I love my country and I want to experience the changes that I'm fighting for. Not every activist wants to run away." Marques here is exactly right. There's this Western idea that everybody's trying to get into our country, whether you're American or Canadian, that people coming from other countries, especially any country in Africa, if you're coming to Canada, oh, you must be trying to stay here. We can't possibly trust you, even though you have a history of traveling the world, returning to your country, reporting and exposing corruption. And not only that, but having done that, you stayed in your country during a civil war. So when you have a history like this as a journalist, that should be enough to allow you into a country like Canada, who is supposed to be an ally with you on these issues. Now, in a really crazy twist, Marques said he will now arrange to meet his son in the United States, the only Western country where he has never had trouble obtaining a visa. So he's had no problems obtaining a visa in the US. But when it comes to Canada, he's had issues. And I was reading one of the stories on this, and they discussed how in 2015, Marques even had a problem getting into Canada to receive his prize from the University of British Columbia. he had to get a senior South African official involved to help approve the visa process. So, why was he rejected? Now, unless something crazy is going on behind the scenes, I think it's clear he was rejected because of racism. Here's a guy who, from the view of border security, they see a guy from an African country who's black, who has criminal charges, even though the criminal charges, as I showed you, are bullshit. But they see a black man from Africa with criminal charges with a son in Toronto, and he may overstay his visa because of those reasons. But this is ridiculous. Looking at this objectively, you can see a professional, a journalist who has a history of fighting corruption, a history of speaking all around the world, a history of going back to his country after visiting Canada. And you can see this is a guy who's not a threat. There is no threat here. So this idea, this is embarrassing. This is embarrassing for me as a Canadian. This should not have happened. And the fact that he has no problem in the US getting a visa, but he has a problem in Canada, shows that there is a serious issue with our border security system. So maybe it's too heavily influenced on who the border security official is, or maybe it's the process. It's not clear, but there is obviously an issue here. So we need to be an ally with journalists like this who are standing up for the greater good, because these are the people that are fighting for us, and we need to fight for them. Hey, if you like this video, hit that subscribe button below and consider throwing me a few bucks on Patreon at patreon.com/therationalnational or therationalnational.com/join.